Hello, everybody. Hello, future orators and declamators. We have reached chapter 1.6 Declamation and Law From Forum to Boardroom. Your lecturer, B.A. Marquez Romo. Welcome. Today we're going to start with our own walking meditation in order to ground ourselves, set our mindset in Rome, on the forums, streets, monuments, where all the Roman declamation took place. Walking meditation, nobody's going to save you. The only one who can save you is yourself through challenging your mindset, your speech, your pitch, your declamation skills, and overall professional, entrepreneurial value skills. Let's start at Ponte Fabricio. Take a deep breath. This is the first footfall. Let's stand ourselves on the oldest bridge in Rome and inhale the damp river. Feel the basalt under your shoes and the quiet truth that these stones have outlived empires. On your exhale, whisper inwardly, I alone cross this bridge. Nobody's going to save me. Only myself, my spirit, my higher creator. Let the world settle. No legion marches to rescue you. No patronus escorts you. Just your pulse and the Tiber slow breath. Tiber Island, the solitary ground. Step onto the islet. Hospitals and temples once promised healing here, yet plague still came. As you walk the short path, note how water curls around both banks. Life's currents always divide before rejoining. Pause midway, place a hand on the parapet or the middle of your chest. Let go of every old mindset, status quo. Of analyzers, of opinions, and remind yourself, current shift, but my step is mine. Lungotevere dei Pierleoni, the river of responsibility. Exit the Tiber Island via Ponte Sestium. Walk, turn left, and follow the Lungotevere southeast. Let the steady flow of traffic mimic the river's persistence. Each inhale counts for slow beats. Each exhale whisper, nobody's coming except me, my spirit, my knowledge, my thoughts, my creator. Feel any need for outside approval, loosen in your chest. Notice the theater of Marcellus rising ahead, once crowded with clapping Romans, now hollow stone. Crowds fade, choices remain. You arrive to Via del Teatro di Marcello, the climb of consequence. At the theater, your right, ascending the gentle slope, sends your legs working. Each step is earned. Past the portico of Octavia's weather columns. Appreciate how neglect and survival coexists. Tell yourself what stands because it endured the embodiments of time, war, and tyrants. Capitol Hill, face of fragments. Take Michelangelo's Coronata stairs or the steeper medieval ramp. Reach the courtyard of the Palazzo dei Conservatori, where the colossal fragments of Constantine, hand, foot, stirring eyes lie scattered. They once assembled a ruler who claimed to unite an empire with Christianism. Now they are broken plages in travertine. Maybe you are broken in emotions in their path. It's time to arrange yourself with the power of declamation. Stand before the giant marble foot, feel its scale, then look down at your own. My stride, yours say quietly, is the only empire I control. Your pieces are your empire. Bring it up together. Breathe in the enormity of the hand. Breathe out certainty that no sculpted savior will lift you forward. Closing breath. Turn toward the panoramic balustrade facing the forum. Ruins below, sky above, everything that tried to last. Everything that inevitably changed. Inhale the city's layered centuries. Exhale any lingering belief in that salvation arrives from outside. It all comes from the inside, from power of spirit, of emotions, of the God within. Leave the hill with a lighter spine. Responsibility is not a burden, but a permission. Signed by you alone. A mantra for your walk back. A cross I choose, I endure. I will be the last man to fold, or woman. Meditate a moment on that. Feel your body alive. Let loose of pains, trouble, old mindset. You are now a powerful declaimer who will use declamation and law to create great things for yourself, family, the city, the country, and the world. Say this. Welcome back, orators. Today we step into Rome, busiest courtroom, a place that never really existed, yet shaped empire more than any single verdict. In school declamation, students argued murders, inheritances, death, tyrannies, betrayal, beer forties, Caesar receipts that were entirely fictional, but every phrase was weighted against real Roman statutes and statutes. The exercise was simple: bend brilliant rhetoric around an unbending law, and see which one cracks first. That is our arena, this session. Reflect for a moment with a meditation and ask yourself, how far can eloquence stretch a statute before it snaps? When does justice demand we rewrite the rules we claim to honor? Most provocatively, and your voice expose a hidden flaw that even the 12 tables missed? I hope that by the end of this session, you'll have forged an evening plea worthy of Cicero, setting precedent, twisting loopholes, or defending the spirit of justice against the letter of the code. So warm up your logic, sharpen your wit, and remember, every great legal reform started as someone's bold declamation, but not to harm the people, to uplift them, to uplift your city, your country. Now, take your seat, court is in session. The cable is your own heartbeat, like the beats that emanate from the T-verb. Let's review declamation happenings about the last session on the politics of declamation. We reviewed several topics or crafts or ideas which are harm to the Republic, civic duty, civil war, Brutus and Caesaricide, ingratitude, recent echoes, Roman values, patria potestas, and dementia, how far farther powers go before it becomes madness, applicatio, mistreatment of the water, raptus, killing. Remember, we are in Rome. Set yourself up to it. New remedies to all of the problems: restorative justice, public confession, civic service, law written to mend, not just to punish. Reread these crafts, ideas, themes, topics, and try to craft a mini declamation, a mini oratory speech that gets you to your state of awareness, motivation, some idea that you want to portray to your boss, to your friends. What virtue would you like to talk about? What recent echo? What ingratitude do you want to mend? Take a bit to analyze these topics that we reviewed last session from the politics of declamation, and craft, if for yourself you can dig a little bit, make a little bit of research, gather ideas from the chat GPT or your favorite AI, take your notes, your ideas, and craft them. I'm going to give you some example of these declamatory happenings. Citizens of Rome, we stand today in the long shadow of betrayal. Some cry Brutus was right. He stopped to save the Republic. Yet I ask, what republic survives when gratitude is murdered at the altar of ambition? Rome's greatest rests on three pillars: civic duty, lawful order, respect for those who nurtured us, from the patria potestas of our fathers to the sacred body of each mother. When a son lives still against a benefactor, when soldiers march on their own streets, the result is not liberty but civil war, a slow bleeding of trust. Call it dementia, call it applicatio, call it righteous rage. The dagger of Caesaricide carves an abyss no Senate decree could breach. For every tyrant felled, two pretenders rise. Unconstrained power is a monster, yet unrestrained vengeance is its twin. I propose a new remedy. Bind would-be tyrants, yes, but bind also the avenger. Let any who raises hand against the state submit to public judgment, restitution, and a year of service rebuilding what he still endangers. Thus law remains the master, passionate servant, and Rome and Sophistopolis, the broken mother of us all. Craft some oratory speech against this. If you were in favor of Caesaricide. What would you say? Or combine both ideas and create a new idea. Not in just the Hegelian way of synthesizing ideas, but in the oratory and declamatory way of creating new craft, new ideas, or recalling past idea that worked well with new adjustments to the era. Take your notes, craft some ideas, and spend a moment, and let's begin with our chapter's content. Declamation and Law. Let's grab our whiteboard in order to write our notes on the importance of the ideas that we are gathering from this session, from declamation and law. As we recalling from the very first chapter, every declamation is introduced by one or more legal dispositions, or by what is presented as such. These dispositions are normally placed at the beginning of the theme and are aimed at establishing the juridical frame within which the situation unfolds and the prerogatives recognized for the parties in the case, or those to which they appeal to justify their own claims. Omitted mention of laws does not necessarily imply their absence. There is a series of laws that are tacitly presupposed, because they are assumed to be well known to the students who are called upon to undertake the controversy. For example, the lex scholastica that recognizes the father's right to inflict applicatio on his own child, or the law that gives to the rapta the possibility of choosing between the death of her seducer or a reparative marriage. The latter often alluded to summarily through the formula lex raptarum. In other cases, laws are implicit, not because they can be easily supplied by the declaimer, but because they pertain to the cultural background against which the controversy is situated. Thus, the well-known paternal right over life and death, vitae necessic potestas, an idiosyncratic characteristic of Roman culture, is explicitly mentioned only in the collection of Calpurnius Flaccus. Who will be recalling in next sessions, rewarded as indemnatos liberos licit occidere. In the other anthologies that have reached us, this law is alluded to without the themes ever making express mention of it. The circumstance is likely explained by the fact that in the Roman context, the right was so much part of the shared imagination and of socially recognized practices, that its essence was taken for granted, without it being necessary to recall it expressly to the attention of students. The vast corpus of scholastic laws, which from one century to the next tend to be repeated substantially identical, have for a long time raised the question of the relation to the actually practiced law of the Roman world, a problem that is in turn closely connected to that of the function of declamatory training with a view to access to the legal professions. Careful evaluations of the corpus were conducted many times over the course of the 20th century, and more recently, but no consensus has ever been reached, that is valid for the totality of the laws used by the rhetoricians. If in many cases the legal principles do find correspondence in attested laws, in other declamatory teachings seems to be shaped by Greek law. Most often, we are dealing with a kind of spurious jurisprudence, which falls only within the confines of Sophistopolis and thus risked creating difficulties for students and teachers when they were no longer within the well-protected boundaries of the classroom. From these spring reservations expressed by Petronius, Quintilian, or Tacitus, and often repeated uncritically by modern scholars, about a curriculum that proposed situations to its users that they could scarcely expect to encounter once they had completed that curriculum and had taken up roles as patrons or as legal experts. Before testing the foundations of these reservations, however, we need to examine certain salient characteristics of scholastic jurisprudence in its entirety. To begin with, Sophistopolis presents itself as an entirely legalized world, like the ones we are living, in the sense that law seems to regulate every aspect of life and of relationship for its litigious inhabitants, while there are very few situations left to private negotiation or to the exercise of non-legal powers and prerogatives. Relations between fathers and sons constitute again a privileged lens through which to view the issue. In the city of the rhetoricians, the rights of a son are not entrusted to general appeals to pietas, but are codified in a series of laws. The duty to give nourishment to aged parents under pain of imprisonment, or more broadly, of assisting them in conditions of great discomfort, respectively, liberi parentes allant aut vinciantur, and liberi parentes in calamitate nedescerant. Or obeying fathers, as can be inferred from the fact that they can be disinherited if they do not, or for abstaining from violence against them, punishment being the loss of the hands. Qui patrem pulsaverit manus ei praesidetur antur, or of suing them in courts for dementia, like the one we reviewed last session. And so on. Even gratitude is subjected in the school themes to precise legal doctrines, invoked to sanction ingratitude. If for Cicero the duty of reciprocating benefits belongs to the category of officia, and thus represents a moral duty whose violation brings harm to one's honor and reputation, but it's not legally prosecuted. And if for Seneca juridical regulation of ingratitude would be absurd because it would threaten the spontaneity inherent in the exchange of benefits and distinguishes it from more banal forms of reciprocity. Declamation envisions a specific actio ingrati, which can be enforced in court against anyone who has not sufficiently compensated a service received. One important consequence of the extension of the legal net to cover virtually all situations of interpersonal and social relations is that the court becomes the only venue for enforcing one's rights or to contest some behavior deemed illegitimate. Other forms of regulation recognized by declamation appears insufficient or constitute the mere premise of a true debate that unfolds before the city's judges. Interesting in this respect is Pseudo-Quintilian's Minor 300, in which a husband first gives his son the task of judging his mother, who is suspected of adultery in a domestic context, and then, when the woman is acquitted, prosecutes her in court and obtains her condemnation. Thus the possibility of a domestic trial, which is the job of asserting and ascertaining the guilt of a member of the family, is assumed by other members, is not entirely excluded. But it's significant that the right of having the final say is given only to public court. Public courts are the ones only endowed with the required impartiality of a third party, whereas the judicium domesticum can be undermined by affective considerations and by personal ties, as in the case of the mother and the son, who is called upon to judge her. But this is not the only case where the inadequacies and limits of family justice are highlighted. Seneca's Controversia 7.1 insists on the same point, when a presumed patricide has been condemned in a domestic trial. It is worth adding that a different area, still characterized by the requirement of impartiality, appears in the Controversia, where an individual, usually a father, seeks authorization to take his own life, suicide, offering reasons for voluntary remorse. Declamatory practice imposes on the aspiring suicide a prosangelia or self-incrimination. With which he asks the authorities to preventively approve his act, under pain of remaining unburied. Besides the debate that such themes provoke in the context of rhetorical teaching, or oratory teaching like the one we are saying here, whether it was appropriate to use self-incrimination figuratively, not for obtaining authorization for suicide, but to bring attention to one's own unhappy condition and to cast blame on the counterparty responsible for it. What we want to highlight is how a public institution is called upon to make pronouncements on situations and conflicts that originate in the private sphere. The only scenario that does not belong among those described so far occurs in the third major of Pseudo-Quintilian, the Miles Marianus. A very controversial historical theme in which the case of a soldier who has killed a tribune to escape the stuprum that the latter intended to carry out is judged in the camp of Gaius Marius, the great Republican general, engaged at the time in the campaign against the Cimbri. Not by chance that the claimer called upon to defend a soldier's case insisted more than once on the commander's duty of impartiality, a duty made all the more critical by the fact that the tribune was one of his relatives. In short, what Sophistophiles taught its adherents was that the only regulatory principle of cohabitation is the law. And thus, concretely, the courts where it was enforced, as well as the declaimers, those future holders of public discourse and of authoritative speech, who guaranteed its correct application. And if this suggests the idea of a professional class that aims simply at promoting itself, at protecting its own role and its own social dignity, what actually emerges from a consideration of scholastic oratory rhetoric is the idea that every judgment, every encroachment on the limits of rights, every abuse of authority is evaluated by a wise legislative system. Sanctioned by an impartial jury and supervised by the holders of effective speech, whose job is to protect that order. Another element, then, of the politics of declamation. Let us come now to the nub of the question, that of the relationship between school jurisprudence and real law, and thus between declamatory training and forensic practice, given that the two contexts only very partially overlap. We need to ask whether this really invalidates the formative value of the rhetorical curriculum and renders it inadequate for accessing the roles of the imperial bureaucracy, for political activity, and for the forensic professions, as ancient and modern detractors of declamation have often claimed. I believe not. We believe not. Recent studies from Romanists such as Dario Mantovani, Marta Bettinazzi, Jacob Stagel, and Junior Rizzelli have shown that although declamatory laws are often fictitious, the arguments and reasoning developed by rhetoricians are completely in line and often perfectly in sync with the thinking of jurists of the classical period. This is a case of the much discussed 13th major of Pseudo-Quintilian, the poor man's beast. Causing malicious damage is to be actionable. A poor man and a rich man were neighbors in the country, and their gardens adjoined each other. The rich man had flowers in his garden, the poor man kept bees in his. The rich man complained that his flowers were being browsed on by the poor man's bees. He gave him notice to move them. When the poor man failed to do so, the rich man sprinkled poison over his flowers. The poor man's bees all died. The rich man is accused of causing malicious damage. This declamation is not only inspired by a well-attested Roman law, but Lex Aquila de Damnum. but also spells out a problem of use controversy addressed by theory, that of the ownership of animals, who by their nature tend to wander from their own land. Jurisprudence states that ownership obtains only so long as the animals exhibit animus revertendi, namely an imitation or a habit of returning home. In the rhetorical debate, the question centered precisely on this, in order to establish if the principle of animus revertendi could be applied in their case as well, as it did to dogs, for example, or if they must be considered owned only to the extent that they were physically under the control of the owner. Apparently, the principle of animus revertendi was considered to hold in the case of beasts, but the question must have been sufficiently interesting to motivate its appearance in Pseudo-Quintilian's Controversia, which can be attributed to a rhetorical of sound juridical education, as he stages the terms of the debate in the form of a concrete scenario. The situation is similar for much more technical texts, such as Minor 260, a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in a fight over dowries, whose valuable juridical argumentation is worthy of a jurist and constitutes an important source for the reconstruction of dowry laws, or Minor 302, a gladiator to bury his father, which is influenced by theoretical debates over the status of gladiators and scaeneci. Other examples could be given. Certainly, the idea is somewhat one-sided, that when rhetorical argumentation and doctrinal reflection seem to touch in some way, this was due to the influence of the latter on the former. In fact, in some cases, it is possible or indeed probable that it was the declaimers who influenced the debates of jurisprudence and not the other way around. Moreover, we cannot forget that the jurists themselves were trained in the rhetorical schools, and in many cases, this training left an indelible imprint on the activities of interpreters of the law, or as members of the imperial chancellery, as Jacob Stagel has recently emphasized. An interesting example from this point of view is constructed by the Controversia on adultery. The controversies amount to about a tenth of the entire corpus of preserved themes. In that light, what is striking is that, on a key point, the law punishing lovers caught in the act, the declaimers seem deliberately to ignore the lex Julia de adulteris quercendis, the measure approved by Augustus between 18 and 16 BCE, that remained in force up to the period of Justinian, and which was the subject of countless interpretations whose traces can be seen in the drastic reduction made by the editors of the Digest. If the legislative regime launched by the Princeps rigorously restricted jus occidendi to the father of the woman and removed it from the husband, except in very well-defined circumstances, Declamation instead adopted a version of the law that, with minimal differences, it is wording, recommends that for the two lovers and recognize the right of anyone who has caught them in the act to exact this punishment, in the first instance a husband. Whosoever surprises an adulterer together with an adulteress, provided that he has killed both, will not be culpable. Thus Seneca Controversia 1.4, whose theme I have translated in chapter 1 and 9.1. So my friends, this will be the end of part 1 of Declamation and Law. As it is fueled with principles and themes, We will be dividing this into parts. So thank you for joining today and have a great rest of your day. In comments, ideas, examples of your declamations, please post them on the LinkedIn comment section. Thank you. This was lecturer P.A. Marcas Romo. Goodbye.